Good evening, everyone. For one, good evening. Welcome to the Great Hall here at Hyman Settlement School. We're very excited to have everyone here on campus and those watching us online as well. I hope everyone had a great day here at the workshop and found it to be one, great to be back, but then also uplifting and educational and just a great time. So I hope everyone had a wonderful time and excited for tonight's activities and programs and for the rest of the week as well. I don't want to take too much of the time now. We'll do more announcements later, but I would like to introduce Jayne Temple to come forth and introduce our first reader this evening.
I'm honored to introduce our short story faculty, Jayne Waldrop, whom I find kinship with since we both grew up in Western Kentucky but call Appalachia home. That longing from home has served Jayne's writing well. Whether she's writing fiction or poetry, she is able to firmly root us in place. Her linked story collection, Drowned Town, a fictional account of the making of Kentucky Lake, Lake Barkley, and land between the lakes, and the effects on those towns and inhabitants, was published last year by University Press of Kentucky through its Fireside Industries imprint, a partnership with Hyman Settlement School. This book has recently been named a silver winner for Indy's Book of the Year Award in the general category. In addition to her fiction, Jayne has published 2 chapbooks, Retracing My Steps and Pandemic Lent, a season in poems, through Finishing Line Press, the former a finalist in the New Women's Voices chapbook series. In addition to her writing, Jayne has served the literary community in other capacities. She has worked as a book columnist for the Courier Journal, literary arts liaison at the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning, writer-in-residence at Rivendell Writers Colony, and served 2 terms on the Kentucky Arts Council. Please welcome Jayne Waldrop.
So much, Jamie, for that introduction. And I'm just so happy to be here. It feels so good to be back in Hyman in person this year. I've done the last 2 years virtually. I'm not sure if I'm doing this right, but it feels so good to be here in person. It's also wonderful to be able to read for you from Drowned Town. Because without Hyman, without that partnership through with the University Press of Kentucky, through Fireside Industries, that partnership has made this book possible, and so the support of Hyman has been critical. And to have Silas House as my editor is sort of a dream come true for this Kentucky fiction writer. So I'm going to read from Drowned Town. And I've also got a new piece I want to read, too. I'm going to read from Drowned Town. As Jamie mentioned, the book talks about the effects of the building of Lake Barkley and the creation of Land Between the Lakes. Western Kentucky went through monumental change mid-century, mid-20th century. So I wanted to capture how this change impacted the people who lived in far western Kentucky. So I'm going to start with the first chapter, the first story in the book, and I'm going to give you, and in that story, you're going to get 2 views of one of the main characters. One is as an adult. Cam is a person who grew up in the old town of Eddyville. It's one of the towns that was destroyed when Lake Barkley was built. She's an adult. She's getting ready to get married in a few days, and she is reminiscing about the old town. And I'm going to skip over, and there's a section where she's a child who's being moved out, who has been moved out to this new created town. Cam was smiling as she left the shop, pleased with how the gown had turned out, but drawn to the place in the photograph. For the last few months, she had focused on the future, whether to get married, what kind of wedding suited them, but today the past pulled at her. She ignored the list of errands in her pocket and decided to drive to the old town. She still remembered the way. The two-lane highway dead-ended at a lonesome knoll overlooking Lake Barkley. Cam parked in a grassy area beside the road and walked toward what had been Water Street, the hilly one that had ended at the ferry landing. The broad lake sparkled in the midday sun. The sky was bright and cloudless. She watched as a large cabin cruiser, better suited for the ocean than an inland waterway, powered its way through the narrow, twisting channel marked by red and green navigation buoys. The marker served as both reminder and warning that the Cumberland River's deep channel still provided the safest passage on a lake that appeared vast but could be deceptively shallow in places. The cruiser spread an oversized wake that rocked nearby fishing boats and caused the captain of a slow, scruffy pontoon boat to swerve at a defensive angle to keep from getting swamped. A lone bronze marker revealed the spot's history as the former site of Eddyville, a thriving town settled near a series of bends in the Cumberland River, which snakes a course through the middle of the country from mountains to barrens to rolling hills. The plaque told the town's role in American history as an outpost on the western frontier, as an important junction during the Civil War, as a commercial center and county seat. The tarnished words also described mid-century government projects for flood control, hydroelectric power, and tourism when the flowing river was dammed. The sign memorialized U.S. presidents, vice presidents, and governors from Kentucky and Tennessee, but failed to mention the people who had lived in the town and had given up their homes as the giant lake rose. They had been told their sacrifice was for the public good. They were never told how much they would miss it or for how long. So Cam is a second grader in this part of the story, and the new town has been constructed, the new school is open, and a lifelong friend of hers is introduced in this section. Inside the elementary classrooms, the floors were shiny, the desktops uncarved, and the seat bottoms not yet blemished by gum wads. The building smelled like fresh paint and plastic. The spines of the full-color textbooks crackled when Cam opened hers for the first time. Outside, the sun felt hot when the students played kickball at recess. There were no trees, and the newly sown grass wore down under the treads of sneakers. Their old school, with its rows of swing sets on a playground shaded by giant oaks, was scheduled to be torn down before the lake waters rose. So were their old homes. In the second week of school, Neville Burgess approached Cam on the playground during recess. She had known Neville most of her life. In the old town, he and her boy cousins had been best friends and played together all the time. But her cousins had moved to Princeton when their house got bought out. She hadn't seen them in a long time. She wondered if Neville had. Cam noticed a bead of sweat rolling down the boy's cheek from the little sideburns his barber had created. "Your house is next," he said. "What's that mean?" she said. "The bulldozers parked next to your old house yesterday." "How do you know?" "I saw it. I ride my bike over to the old town every day." "You're not supposed to. You're going to get in trouble." "Those old bastards don't need to know everything," he said defiantly. Neville liked to cuss. Cam guessed he picked it up from his dad. The Burgesses had lived 3 houses from the Weatherfords in Eddyville, and they used to hear his dad hollering during warm weather when everybody's windows were open. "That man sure could cuss," her mother had often said. After the buyout and before the move, he shouted and cussed even more, and most of the bad words were aimed at the government and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Mr. Burgess had held out for as long as he could. They were one of the last families to sell. They might be tearing it down right this instant, Neville said. He seemed proud that he knew something she didn't. They were moving down the street, and there's not much left. It'll all be gone by the end of the week. How far away is the old town? Cam asked. She didn't have her bearings yet. It might have been 1,000,000 miles away. Everything was so different. Not far, really. We'll go the back way so nobody sees us. The government owns it all now, and they've put up fences, but I know how to get in, Neville said, looking a little less defiant. I'll think about it, she said. If you want to see it before it's gone, meet me at the end of your street right after school, he said. Better change clothes, though. I'm not towing you on my bike if you're wearing a dress. For the last hour of school, Cam thought about where she used to live. She wanted to see the old house, but she had heard her parents talk about people being arrested for going back to see their land one more time before it was flooded. Trespassing, her dad had called it. She had heard the word in church and knew it meant something bad, something she wasn't supposed to do, but she couldn't recall her parents specifically telling her not to go. She walked home from school, changed clothes, and told her mother that she was going to play baseball with her friends. Neville was waiting for her, like he said. Get on, he said. They took off down a dirt path through tall grasses in uncut fields and blackberry thickets, staying away from the main road and eventually heading into hilly woods. You sure you know the way, Neville? Don't worry, I can find it. I've been going every afternoon. Neville was standing up to pedal, and Cam had most of the seat to herself. She suspected Neville didn't want her to hang on to him. He never was one to hold hands or sit beside girls at church, and she knew there were certain rules to be observed as a bike passenger, like not to drag her feet or lean over too far in any direction, and not to hug up too close. She tried not to touch his blue plaid shirt any more than necessary, but she couldn't keep from grabbing hold when they bounced hard along the path. He pumped the pedals with all his might on the last steep hill, but her extra weight made the climb impossible. They got off and walked the bike the rest of the way to the top. Do you know where you're at? He asked. She looked around. Not really. Everything looked so different. We're up on Pea Ridge, he said. She remembered Pea Ridge, but still didn't recognize this place. Pea Ridge was a limestone bluff high above town that overlooked the river and the entire valley. A few old farmhouses on the ridge remained unchanged. They weren't part of the buyout because the lake level would never get this high. The cemetery didn't have to be moved either. But where is everything, she said. She saw bare, rusty red dirt and uprooted trees, churned and splintered as if an angry giant, awakened by the ruckus, had stepped down from the ridge to smash it all. This is all that's left, Cam, he said, pointing. Looks like they took the roof off your house today. Where? I don't see it. She squinted to follow his finger but couldn't find the house. Can we get closer? We're not supposed to, but sometimes I walk around down there if nobody's working. They listened for sounds of workers or machinery and heard none. Birds singing like normal were the only sign of life. They hid the bike behind a boulder and started walking down the road that led to town. The asphalt was undamaged, still striped in yellow down the middle. Just past the Keep Out warning barricade, Neville pointed to a hill of red bricks that caused the chain-link fence to bulge. That's the shirt factory where my mama used to work. The front door used to be there, he said, pointing again. Cam remembered the large building and the whistle that used to blow at noon to signal the workers' lunch break. It blew at the end of the day, too, a sound that was heard all through town, alerting kids that their parents were heading home from work. Where'd they build the new shirt factory, she said. In her mind, everything from the old town resurrected somewhere in Sycamore. There's not going to be a new one. Those sons of bitches closed it for good, he said. When Neville scowled, he looked just like his dad, sounded like him too. My mama's still looking for work. They walked farther into town. Cam saw a sign that said Water Street. Now I know where we are, she said. She looked to the left and spotted her old house. "Come on, Neville," she shouted as she ran toward it. When she got closer, she saw that its windows and doors were missing and the walls were jagged where its roof had been torn off. As the children approached, bricks from the chimney fell into what had been the kitchen. "We better not go in," Neville said. "It might come down while we're inside." Cam wanted to go upstairs to the bedroom she had shared with Becky, but she was too scared. Without its roof, the structure seemed less like a home and more like a drawing from the house plan book. She glanced across the street. "Miss Laclede's house looks fine. Let's go over there," she said, turning toward a white frame house with a wraparound front porch. Miss Laclede, Cam's piano teacher, had lived alone in the big house built years ago by some distant ancestor. She was an old woman with eyes so clouded with cataracts she could hardly read the music books. That didn't matter because she could play the songs by heart. After the lesson, Miss Laclede always served lemonade and oatmeal cookies to Cam on the porch, where they sat in oversized wicker rockers. Sometimes Miss Laclede told stories. As Miss Laclede told stories, Cam picked at the dark green enameled wicker with her fingernail, revealing a previous coat of dull white paint underneath. The old woman told Cam that she had never lived anywhere but that house. She was the last of the Laclede family. The others were all dead. Now she was too. Cam's dad said Miss Laclede didn't want to leave her house, so she just died right before they made her move. Cam and Neville climbed the concrete steps that led to Miss Laclede's generous front porch. From here, the river looked wider than Cam had ever seen it. "Is the water coming up?" she asked. Neville nodded. "That's why they're in a hurry to tear it all down." From the outside, Miss Laclede's house looked sturdy, untouched, while its neighbors lay in ruins. A few smoldered from bonfires set to reduce the amount of demolition debris. Massive piles of brick and stone surrounded the house like the walls of a fort. But inside, the process had begun. Pieces of the house were missing, like the stained glass window on the staircase landing that once glistened lavender and pink in the afternoon sun when Cam arrived for her music lessons. Now, standing in the front hall and looking up, she stared through a hole in the ceiling all the way to blue sky. A carved fireplace mantel sat propped against the front wall. Bronze chandeliers were stacked nearby, and the fancy wood banister had been ripped off the staircase. Miss Laclede was gone, and the last remaining evidence that she ever existed, her house, was being picked apart as if by a wake of vultures. Thank you. I'm not sure how much time I have left. Do I have any time? Or I don't have a watch. I've lost my Fitbit and I don't have a watch. Oh, okay, I've got just time. This is a really short piece of fiction a little flash fiction piece that is new. Bird Bones. The bright, slick watercraft arrived with blaring Bluetooth speakers, a full range of speed and sound, and investment in their next chapter, retirement. They had survived careers, moves, child rearing, his lung cancer treatment, her osteoporosis diagnosis. They figured they had earned this fiberglass symbol of freedom. Before taking the jet ski on a test run, he adjusted his glasses and read the instruction manual cover to cover, concentrating on the fine print, absorbing how to safely operate the wasp-like vehicle across the lake's broad expanse. Grimacing as he read, he learned of hazards he had never before connected to having fun. A serious risk of head, anal, or vaginal injuries from falling off backwards. "It'll rip you a new one," he warned her. Then he ordered neoprene shorts for them both. It wasn't their best look. They launched, going easy at first, taking turns at the helm, milking the throttle white-knuckled as they passed a towboat pushing a long line of barges. They grew more adventurous with each trip, then hit their stride at speeds they would have forbidden their youthful kin. Daily they covered fresh territory, found unexplored bays filled with water lilies and birds that glistened like beautiful flying machines as the humans and aves moved in tandem near the surface. They witnessed eagles, osprey, Canadas, egrets, and great blue herons, sometimes holding poses undisturbed or treading calmly, sometimes lifting off, their massive wings stroking the sky to find a rising air current to ride. One glorious day with brilliant blue skies dotted by cotton ball clouds, they decided to head to the bird sanctuary across the lake. Most days they shared a feeling of not wanting to miss out on anything, even when they felt dog-tired, almost droopy from working in their new organic garden. Before, they had never had time for jet skis or tending heirloom tomatoes and pole beans. Admittedly, they had a lot to learn. One of their first lessons about gardening was the need for a tall, sturdy fence to keep out the free-range deer that also lived around the lake. They pushed and rocked the jet ski off its little dock at water's edge. The engine started on the first try. He drove. She settled herself onto the elongated passenger seat. Along the way, he swerved to dodge logs and shallow, muddy patches. He decided his vision seemed sharper with the new blue blocker aviators he had bought online. With each unexpected swerve, she startled, as if she might lose her balance and tumble off. Her arms cinched his waist like a belt. When they hit rogue waves and landed hard, she leaned in, close to his ear, mouthing their new safe words over the roar of engine and prine. "Bird bones," she said, their prearranged signal to slow down, a reminder of the brittle realities chasing them. She breathed his familiar scent, and the sight of the glinting silver threading his temples made her snug up, closer, skin tight, holding on for their dear lives. In that moment, she sensed the rush of a world passing with fierce velocity. She opened her eyes just as they turned west directly into the sun, and she swore it felt like flying.
Good evening, everybody. You all can tell me whether the microphone is working for tall people as well. All right, cool. So, Caleb Johnson has said that he learned to start telling stories in the woods, specifically in the 40 acres of woods behind his grandmother's house in Arley, Alabama. See, when Caleb was a kid, he spent a lot of hours during family gatherings out there alone in those woods, roaming around, cutting trees, building forts, getting up to, I'm certain, all kinds of mischief. And when he would finally make it back to the house, his mother and his grandmother and his aunts would want to know what he had been up to. And apparently, playing in the woods was not an appropriate response, because Caleb's family was a family of storytellers, and they wanted to hear the story. So Caleb started making up those stories to satisfy them. And Caleb's stories do satisfy, and you know, they're magical. They're fantastic in the old sense of the word. You know, he mixes the extraordinary into that tradition of oral storytelling that he picked up from his mother and his grandmother and his aunts, and somehow manages to ground all of that in a sense of place where the landscape is as much a character as any of the people in his stories. So, you know, when I first posted who all was going to be here this summer and all the instructors and the workshops that were going to be here, I looked at Caleb's bio, and I was like, okay, you know, BA in journalism from the University of Alabama, MFA from the University of Wyoming, a Swanee Fellowship, a Gentile Foundation Fellowship, and this gamut of jobs from, you know, middle school teacher and butcher and janitor and small town reporter. And I thought, you know, if I am lucky enough to make it home in this summer, I need to, you know, carve out some time to sit over at Maystone or up in the chapel and have a conversation with this gentleman. This is like an interesting dude. And then I picked up a copy of his novel, Treeborn, and started reading it and got immersed into it, and really quickly realized why Daniel Wallace, the author of Big Fish and Extraordinary Adventures, said about this novel, I can't remember the last time I read a book I wish so much I'd written. Treeborn is beautiful and mythic in ways that I would never have been able to imagine. So once I read that and once I read this, I thought, I need to do a little bit more than have conversation. Like, I need to pull together some piece of the novel that I'm working on and get down to Hyman this summer and get into Caleb's workshop, which I did. And so far, it is fabulous in all the senses of the word fabulous. So I hope that you all will help me welcome Caleb Johnson.
Try to lift this up a little bit if that's okay, so I'm not hunched over as much. Can y'all hear me out there? Is that okay? Oops. Well, thanks for that wonderful introduction, Rachel, about made me cry, so it's very kind of you. And thanks to everybody who's here to listen to these readings tonight, and to Josh and everybody else at Hyman for inviting me this year. I'm just really tickled to be here. I've never been to Hyman as a participant or a faculty member before, but I've heard wonderful things, of course, from others who have, and I'm having a ball so far, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the week. I've decided to read from a novel in progress rather than Treeborn, and I'm supposed to give it to my agent this week, so this is the first time I've read from it, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, which is, it's largely based on my paternal grandmother's life, and at the time I wrote Treeborn, I think it was a matter of guts to a degree. I didn't really have the guts to own up to how much I was drawing from my own autobiography and to kind of say it honest, and so I masked a lot of my mother's family stories and my kind of thoughts and experiences with them in magical realism, and I highly fictionalized some things and kind of hid behind that to a degree. And since then, I've been a bit lost in the wilderness. I've finished a novel and put it in the drawer. I've had fits and starts with others, and now I'm to this one. And this time, I'm less interested in hiding behind some of those aspects of fiction and the fantastical and supernatural that I maybe did with Treeborn, and trying to tell it straight a little more. So to tell you a little bit about my granny, my father's mother, she was born to a teenage mother, the product of an affair with a married man who worked at a bank. And her mama gave her away to a widowed cattle farmer and left the country in rural Alabama for Birmingham, where she became a sex worker. And my granny off and on was taken by her mother to the city and lived with her and went back and forth between this widow's farm. But that was really her home, this farm. And in the fall of 1951, just as my granny was about to give birth to a child of her own, the woman who raised her was raped and murdered in her own home where my granny grew up. And the hunt for the killer and the subsequent trial was front page news in our rural county. And as you'll hear in this excerpt, I didn't know about any of this really until the last few years of my granny's life. She and I weren't all that close until near the end of her life. I had no clue about her past, this part of it among many others, and I'm still learning a lot about it. So this novel is in part my attempt to understand and recreate that past and how I came to be the way I am, and my father came to be the way he is, and my sister, among others. And I'll never know it all, right? And I can't know it all even through research, which is partly why it's a novel. But what I'm going to read to y'all is there are these sections that I have written that I guess you would call autofiction. They're kind of just memoir, really, to be honest with you, where I address my childhood and my parents and their marriage and my relationship with my granny, and growing up in the same place but a different time as her. And I think one reason I'm doing that in this novel is because I didn't want to write just a granny novel. I didn't want to write just a piece of historical fiction, as much as I admire some of that. I wanted it to have another layer to it. So this is in part my attempt to do that. So here's a chapter. It's called A Matter of Necessity. We found each other as adults. It was a matter of necessity. My granny needed someone to drive her to the grocery store, the pharmacy, to various dollar and hardware chains where she bought things she desired for reasons I did not understand. A heavy aluminum flashlight, a Phillips head screwdriver to replace one she'd mislaid, AA batteries in bulk, a bag of peppermint candy, television guides, dog treats, a garden hose. She carried crisp 50s and 100s in her wallet and made a show of counting them out. After finishing these errands, we typically sat a while in silence on a screened porch attached to the block house where Granny lived alone. An overfed chihuahua named Tippy circled our feet. Leaves on a magnolia tree clattered in dull summer breezes. A hound bedded down in monkey grass just below the porch. Neither of us knew much to say. Each minute passed painfully, as though time was a splinter being slowly drawn from the hand. My days were otherwise untethered from responsibility. I'd recently quit a newspaper job and moved in with my parents because I wasn't mature enough to handle what was required of me, professionally speaking. I mean, by my editor, by the paper itself, by the battered river town we covered, and by the vocation of journalism with a capital J, which I'd studied at college in Tuscaloosa when I wasn't partying or traveling with bands. At first, I was grateful just to have a job amid a recession. I worked 6 days a week, filed at least as many stories each day I clocked in. My position was salaried, yet we still had to clock in with those old-timey punch cards. Often I forgot to clock out in a rush to whatever bar I'd chosen to spend my remaining waking hours. A favorite was Roger's Lounge, where my age and appearance meant I was something of a novelty to other patrons who were old enough to be my parents and dressed like the blue-collar workers they were, rather than, like myself, an actor transported out of some 70s film. The newspaper had a dress code, collared shirts and slacks for men. I wore my hair long, my sideburns thick, pearl snap shirts and polyester pants salvaged from thrift store bins, and leather cowboy boots I thought completed the look. Back then, I saw my life as a spectacle unfolding before me, an audience of one, and lived as though my actions were of little consequence. The newspaper offices were located on a rundown street paralleling the river. The building's lowest level housed a printing press I only ever glimpsed from the top of a set of poorly lit stairs. An older black man operated the press. We never spoke, but sometimes took in fresh air together on a balcony dangling over the muddy river. His face and hands and clothes were all ink-stained. He reminded me of my father in this way, silent and soiled by his work. I'd become a newspaper man because my father read the local paper, and I finally figured out that someone had to write the stories appearing in it. I'd gone to college because my mother told me that's what I was supposed to do, even though she didn't until later in life. I wondered, did the printer's wife wash his clothes, or like my mother, did she send him to a laundromat in hopes of extending the lives of their washing machine? In a way, I feared this man, though I've never feared my own father. This fear stemmed from, I suspect, our reliance on one another. Maybe it was actually dread I felt. If I didn't do my job, then the printer couldn't do his. The press would not run. The paper would not print without my words to go in it. My parents and my granny both subscribed to the paper, even though we covered a town and a region hours away from where they lived in the foothills of the state. Each issue arrived by mail some days after its publication date. Often Granny called me and complained about the delay, as though I held sway with the U.S. Postal Service. She read all my stories, she said, and saved copies for me. This was unnecessary. I could take home as many copies as I wanted free of charge, and I did, stowing 2 of every issue in a closet for posterity. Back then, I intended on becoming a famous newspaper writer like my college mentor, and imagined one day looking back on this early work with fondness rather than disappointment I feel now. Everyone in my family seemed glad when I quit and moved back home, though. The population of Selma was majority black, which meant my family believed life there was undesirable and unsafe. They were pleased I got out of that place, which is the phrase they used when referring to Selma. That place, how do you live there? They'd never even visited it, knew only what they were taught in school about the civil rights movement, which in Alabama amounted to not much and very quickly. They wanted to know what I was going to do now. At the time I started driving my granny places, I possessed only a naive plan to go back to school for a master's degree in creative writing. Like many families, mine has things we speak around, in particular my father's side. None of us were ever close when I was young. I blame my parents, which is an easy thing to do in any case. They should have divorced. I understand divorce is a modern solution to marriages that don't work, and their marriage wasn't modern in any sense. Even in the 80s and 90s, divorce wasn't common where I grew up. There's plenty of shame attached to it for the parents and the children. We made outcasts of classmates who lived only with their mothers. Even those of us whose fathers might as well lived elsewhere, they were so removed from the day-to-day of parenting. At any rate, I saw cousins and aunts and uncles on my father's side for a few hours on Thanksgiving and Christmas, if at all. In my memory, our conversations are stilted, drilled down not an inch below the surface of subjects such as school and sports. It was the same way with my granny, who always seemed to tolerate our presence rather than enjoy the company of her grandchildren. We were strangers in a sense. My pawpaw called me boy, a generic epithet that made me wonder if he knew my name at all, despite my middle name being his nickname. I knew less of him than her. Now, like him, I have tattoos on my arms, and I can't say our similarities end there. For a long time, I believed I could. Regardless, my sister and I were forced to choose sides at an early age. We chose our mother because evolution, and because she was more outwardly loving than our father knew how to be, and because he worked 6 nights a week in a coal mine more than an hour's drive from home. We saw him maybe 2 hours a day, except Saturdays when he had off. We chose what we knew or what we were told by our mother and her family, and for many years held to that rather than ask ourselves what the other side of the story looked like. My sister still hasn't done much asking from what I can tell. She and my mother remain very close. Over the last decade, I've moved closer to my father in ways. It's taken me this long to realize how much of what we know of the world arrives secondhand until one day it doesn't. The fault here is mine. I remember one time my mother asked my sister and me if we wanted her to leave our father. I can't recall our answers, probably yes. We hated him because that's what we were taught to feel. Our parents argued and fought, but if things became physical, I never saw it. Both of them were hit by their fathers, though. Perhaps they broke that cycle and never hit me or my sister by channeling some violence onto each other. I don't know. I've since going back as far as I can recall, though, that my parents weren't happy with one another. They tolerated each other's presence at best. My sister and I loved our mother and often fretted over this unhappiness, still do. She never did leave our father for good, and now she can't. Money and age and accumulated inertia make it an impossible thing to do. There were sojourns to stay with relatives, of course, separations these were called. One time we were living with our mother's mother when my father and my granny showed up in the yard unannounced. My grandmother was so furious at whatever had happened between my father and my mother that she threatened to beat him and Granny with a baseball bat if they didn't get in the car and leave right away. Granny never forgave her this. Years later, when she and I were riding around together, she'd bring it up. As my grandmother succumbed to Alzheimer's, Granny bragged about the quality of her mind in comparison. It was remarkable, her mind, and I believe the things she told me. The basis for this book is her words, which I ought to say my father generally disputes. He tells me she became bitter in her later years and resented the way she'd been brought up. How could she not? I suspect she also resented where she ended up, alone in a place that did not belong to her. After Pawpaw died, the people running the church camp where he'd worked took care of Granny. She was allowed to keep living rent-free in the house, which the camp owned, and they paid her insurance, and workers looked in on her from time to time and fixed whatever broke on the property. Despite this kindness, the camp was my pawpaw's home and not hers, which was several miles down the road, yet accessible only in her mind. For all my life, my grandparents lived at this entrance to an Episcopal church camp situated among more than 1,000 acres bordering national forest land, creeks and trails and waterfalls and canyons, a swinging bridge. Our pawpaw was the caretaker, which is a generous title for handyman. This job, I later learned, the longest held among many throughout his life. A photograph of him hangs inside the main office to this day, and people speak of Pawpaw with a reverence fitting someone whose portrait hangs outside their home. We weren't allowed in the camp, though. Our grandparents said we would bother the staff and visitors. I remember once going for a hike there, holding a shaking cable as we crossed the bridge to a high bluff with some kind of ruin underneath its lip-like overhang. I think my mother organized this excursion. I'm sure she paid for it later. My father was always pointing out things she did that he didn't like in cutting fashion. My mother could walk on eggshells or do as she saw fit. For a long time, she chose the former, and us kids learned to do the same. Every decision we made was calculated against our father's potential to explode. Through enough practice, the equation wouldn't fail us. We could maintain some peace. When I was young, I didn't question why my grandparents were the way they were. I only understood a visit to their house involved behaving in a manner that wasn't required of me at home, where I pretty much did as I pleased. On holidays, we ate in the living room, bath towels spread atop carpet so we didn't make a mess. Older cousins kneeled at a coffee table as though they were about to receive communion. Sometimes an adult sat on the couch with a paper plate balanced on one knee and made awkward conversation. Otherwise, it was us grandchildren alone with our pawpaw, who rarely moved from a lazy boy facing the TV built into a wooden cabinet in one corner of the room. He never said much except to the dogs. There were always dogs inside and out of that house. Pekingese with rotting teeth, hounds with jaundiced eyes, whatever stray emerged from the woods and stuck around for some easy meals. The dogs, much like our pawpaw, were moody and given wide berths by everyone except my father, who could pet them without worrying about getting nipped. After lunch, we escaped outdoors. In the front yard was the Magnolia Tree we sometimes climbed to its highest reaches. Down the side of the house towered unscalable pines. Farther back stood a barn and other outbuildings filled with junk we longed to pilfer. We were forbidden access, though there was nothing we could have hurt except ourselves. I remember going inside that barn exactly once, again with my mother, who also loves old things. We opened a broken down truck and some boxes containing jars and magazines and engine parts. I asked to bring home some comic books I found, but wasn't allowed. I want to be clear, my childhood was a happy one. I didn't want or hunger or worry all that much about things, not like I worry now at least. I was made to feel so safe that later the reality of existence came as quite a shock to me. I thought life ran on an upward trajectory, the present improving upon the past and the future holding even greater potential. Later, I became not a little angry and afraid. I resented my parents, especially my mother, who did most of the raising while my father worked. How unfair, how ungrateful of me, how I now wish the same things for my son. The notion of inheritance runs strong in my mother's family. We have a saying that you got so-and-so from this person or that one. I'm sure this isn't uncommon, but I've come to believe it's meaningful to us because we have little in the way of material wealth to pass down from generation to generation. For example, I got a love of nature from my mother and her mother, which came from her mother and my great-grandmother, and for many years I thought my penchant for storytelling also came down this same line. In part it did. My great-grandmother wrote a gossip column for the county's lawn newspaper. An aunt published a collection of poems that angered some kin for its portrayal of a relative's suicide by way of Russian roulette. I never took my granny as a storyteller till we became close. One day she brought up her childhood. I started asking questions. Now I suspect she was waiting for someone to come along and do just that. Those questions appear throughout this book, along with attempts at answering them by way of recreating a particular crime and the lives touched by it. I have no choice now that everyone who survived this time is gone. I've wrestled with the urge to do it at all, though, and for a time I did put it off. Yet the older I get, the more I realize I'm like my father, and the more I wonder how he came to be made this way. It must have to do with his parents and the environment they raised him in, same as me and mine, and how I ended up here. Such is the way of life. We never fully know ourselves, let alone others. the great misunderstanding of any relationship is that intimacy somehow begets omniscience.
Is right? All right. What powerful readings, both of those. I'm Jim Minnick. It's great to be here. It's great to be back. It's been over a decade since I've been a student here. And I'm especially thrilled to be a student this year of Nicole Brown, and honored to introduce her. So first, some of the basics. Nicole Brown grew up in Kentucky and Florida, earned an MFA from Vermont College, served as editorial assistant to the late Hunter S. Thompson, and has worked as an editor and publicist for small press. As you would expect, she's published widely in such places as the New York Times and Oxford American, and she has published a chapbook and 3 books of poetry, Sister, Fanny Says, and most recently, the Donkey Elegies. Plus, she co-authored a book of poetry prompts with her partner. These books have won many awards, including the Weatherford for the best best poetry book of the year from the Appalachian Studies Association. She has won grants from a slew of places, including the National Endowment of the Arts, and she has served as a guest teacher also in a slew of places like Sewanee and Palm Beach Poetry Festival, where she currently serves as president. She's married to another fine poet, Jessica Jacobs, and the couple live in Asheville, North Carolina, where Nicole spends much of her time volunteering at animal sanctuaries. So those are the basics. What I really want you to consider tonight is one word: donkey. Soft-muzzled, big-lipped, periscope-eared donkey. Sure-footed yet vulnerable-souled donkey. Eeyore of Poohland with the pinned-on tail donkey. Fierce guardian, kick you in the head donkey. Centuries of use, millennia of abuse donkey. Carrier of so much, water and bullets and bodies donkey. Classic punchline of the animal kingdom, jackass donkey. And of course, brazenly loud as the hinge of the world's largest door, swinging wide, donkey. All of these are from Nicole Brown's The Donkey Elegies, and like any good writing, this book makes us see the donkey for what it is, a beautiful and absolutely holy creature. And I want to give you one that you have not yet found in your book that I have for you, and that is Dawn Key, D-A-W-N, Key. Because Nicole Brown, like any good writer, makes us see ourselves as part of the same world that created the holy donkey, that we too are holy, especially if we let the donkey open that rusty hinged door in us with a wild yelp of glee. So grab hold of that handle, listen close, and enter. You'll be a better person, I'm sure, so please join me in welcoming Nicole to stage.
Now I wish I just had a really good bray for you. Thank you so much. Good Lord, it feels so good to be here. I just want to throw this out here. I do a lot of conferences, a lot of workshops. This is my favorite. Hands down, favorite food. Every time I call home, Jessica says, "Baby, your accent is really sounding thick." And I was like, "Shut up, this is how I sound. Just shut up."
This is how I'm meant to be. So it feels good, and it feels real good to be back in person with you guys. Really, really good. So good, in fact, that I'm going to do something a little bit different tonight. I thought about reading poems about animals, which I've been working on for 6 years, the donkey elegies. I've been writing a lot about goats and turtles and possums and all kinds of critters that I love. But I feel really safe around you guys, so much so that I thought I might just abuse you this evening. So do forgive me. And this is also your trigger warning. I talked to Doug Van Gundy before I stepped up here, and he said, honey, if you need to feel better, you need to watch this. And he showed me his phone where I watched a baby hippo in a kiddie pool, and it did make me feel better. So if you need to leave and step outside and watch a video of a baby hippo in a kiddie pool. Her name is Fiona. She's at the Cincinnati Zoo. I highly recommend it. And I will not be offended if you step out. Because what I want to do, similar to you, is read some new stuff. And one of the things that has been in my way these past few years, trying to write these poems about these animals, is that my body keeps tripping me up. In particular, my body is prone to make tumors, lots and lots of them, in my breasts, in my abdomen, in my leg, and every time they pop up, they scare the living hell out of me. And thus far, knock on wood, 2 cancer centers later, several surgeries, they have always been benign. But it has made this relationship with my body that's been difficult to manage. You know, when you touch your own body in the shower and you're like, oh, what's that? What is that? And I truly believe that how you feel about nature is how you feel about your body, is how you feel about nature. And so it's something that I'm trying to work through. I'm going to open with a poem that I actually wrote as part of a generative session I did online with Carrie Gunter Seymour. Do y'all know her? Right? You know her. You got to. She does these great generative sessions. I highly recommend them. And the prompt was to examine your body for its scars and talk about the stories therein. So this is a poem called Scars, How to Explain Them, What to Say. Say you rescued a baby antelope from the suffocating maw of a crocodile. Say you followed a clownfish down among the bleached and dying coral and raked yourself open, stirring up a shiver of sharks. Say an Indy 500 riot of diesel and glass, your girl dropping her cigarette in the stands when you crashed. No, say it was an inevitable misstep on a sharp glacier, your blood a cardinal song on all that white. No, wait, I'll quit my kidding. Let me tell you the truth. I fell down a well and met a tangle of rusted fence along dead farmer chucked down there, thinking no one would ever drink from that place anymore. No, I threw myself down and met the black glass of my reflection in what water was left. No, wait, I landed safely. The muck up to my neck, the pit bottom soft as a kiss. I waited there as long as I could, but cut myself on that barbed wire just trying to climb back out. You might think what I'm describing is depression, but it was more like the Lord threw darkness over my face the way you might use a blanket to cover a mare's eyes, so to lead her out of a burning barn, the way I once cupped my palm around the terrified face of a panicked cottontail, She had been caught by a fence, half her skin ungloved, and it was all I knew to do while another got the suturing done. Yes, the truth about these many scars is the Lord wrote their many names along my abdomen and breast and leg, each bruised stitch a syllable, every yellow crust of glue a note, a lone scythe around my navel to mark the time when what was given to me was whole and unbroken, when my skin didn't know a cut, much less the rush of surgical bulbs blasting that liver dark beneath. When those scars were fresh, I could at least read them clearly. They were scrawled in shades of carmine and purple and rose, but as my aunt warned, when a cut is new, you've still got time to help it heal, but once it turns white, it's over. There's nothing that can be done. And yes, there are also scars not even I can see, adhesions that make it hard to sit up straight, sticky knots that won't quit like a trapped bird scratching the wall under my ribs. For that, I've got no good story to tell, nor do I have a thing to say about the cuff where my cervix used to be, how the tissue healed so exuberant and proud the doctor had to go back in with long sticks of silver nitrate to burn it back into place. And though it's hard to forgive all those tumors for what they've done to me, I get it. I've made a few scars myself. Even the moment I was born, I ripped through the young body of my mother. Yes, I did that just with the sheer force of wanting to be. This next poem is a longer poem. My dear wife keeps telling me, she's like, baby, just take the line breaks out and write some essays. And I'm like, but I like my line breaks. So just hang with me. This is a poem called Abattoir. Abattoir is a word that means slaughterhouse. So abattoir is a word that means slaughterhouse. A name. A name for the daughter. A name for the daughter I'll never have. A name for the daughter I'll never have if not for the meaning of the name I mean, but forgive me, it's such a beautiful word, that stutter of T's, a toothy trill of the tongue, the taming of that rough R, so damn beautiful, so damn French. Hear me then. Abattoir, abattoir angel, did you brush your hair like mama told you 100 strokes? Abattoir with blue ribbons and braids, a real sucker like I was at that age for all things fairy small, calling fireflies yard stars and mushrooms Tinkerbell parasols. My abattoir. Smelling of cornbread fresh from the oven, soft as sheets from the dryer, so cotton warm, so cotton bright. Or if not her name, then maybe a name for the woods. The woods I wasn't allowed to enter when I was young. Even the park being a place where I was taught a girl went to get herself raped. The mothers with coffee at the kitchen table reading about yet another girl in the newspaper, reading out loud to make sure I could hear, wanting me to see her, her eyes hiving with ants, her braids mud matted with crawdads in the creek. Let's call the place Abattoir Woods then, the woods in Arkansas. The first woods I finally stepped into at 40. The first hike I ever braved alone, surrounded by the ghost of some man or other behind every virgin oak his fly already down. Because it's no story to say that first day on the trail was, in fact, flecked red. That much, I swear, is true. I wouldn't lie about such a thing as blood, most likely deer blood or turkey blood or dog blood, and not the blood of some girl ahead, the girl I was maybe, or the girl I'll never have, a girl likely charmed by the small green fluorescence of an inchworm acrobating in invisible filament, a magic trick on thin air when, poof, the girl was gone, split open from throat to crotch. Oh, abattoir, abattoir in abattoir woods, don't you know that rapist was made real not just by the many mother warnings, but by what actually was? She wasn't making up that news, and back then there seemed no better place for a body than the park, which is to say, I was once a girl with my very own French name, a name pretty but dangerous if a man found it too pretty to resist, which did happen back when I too thought mushrooms were parasols and funny. It didn't happen in the woods. Which is to say, I do not have a daughter, which is to say, I never will, and this may be why. Which is to say, after my last surgery, they took my uterus and I was left with an operative report. Abdominal mass, it read, 16 centimeters, which is 6 inches, a size far too small for a baby to survive, but one that needed to be delivered nonetheless. Transvaginal, the report read, a task accomplished after dilating the cervix and freeing the uterus, large and misshapen, it read. All of it dissected away along with 2 dark, congested fallopian tubes, those bruised swan necks cut away from the swan body and swan head. Yes, all of it was slid from that ready-made hole, pulled down the canal, tumor and uterus and all, kit and caboodle, the surgeon said. All of it at once from me. So forget the girl, forget the woods. Let abattoir be the name of that abdominal tumor, heavy as a sugar sack, that baby born with no brain and no spine that mistook my ascending colon as placenta and latched there for 7 years before it was her time to go. That baby so acutely mute she was baptized with the name Mass. Let me call her abattoir as I carry her into abattoir woods, her red cape poppy bright, the red of deer blood, the red of girl's blood, red as any animal skinned and quartered and given more palatable names. Not deer, but venison, not pig, but pork, not cow, but beef, and poor chicken, just chicken like a girl too homely to even have a name worth remembering at all. Which is to say, how I felt about the woods as a girl and sometimes still feel as old as I'm getting now is how I know my body once was. Beautiful, but a dangerous thing. Secretly growing a thing that nearly broke me years after I thought I could leave behind a man's mouth as a thing full of meat with a beautiful name. In that November day, that first day I stepped alone into the woods, I followed that trail of blood as far as I dared, but found nothing left. Which is to say, I calmed down, and that forest held me with a green kind of apathy that can sometimes feel like forgiveness, and I cried. Which is to say, I never figured what happened who had bled or if they lived. Which is to say, I return now to that spot where the bleeding stopped, or at least the leafy place where I can see blood no more. In my arms is everything taken from me, and it's there I lay abattoir to rest. This poem is called Grace, and it opens with an epigraph by Wendell Berry. There are no unsacred places, there are only sacred places and desecrated places. Grace. When they open me, let them find not the slippery rags and muck of my gut, but a wet field glistening with the first light it has seen. Red blossoms squinting and shy with bumbles sleeping inside. Let them know they're the first to witness the dripping meat and slop of me, and let them be the last. Let them lift the tumor easy as a good farmer harvests a ripe melon brightly winking from the sucking mud. Let them hold up that misunderstood fruit, weigh her, put her gently aside. And Lord, keep them from posing for a joke like the photo I saw online, jerk residents, baby rocking in their arms, another infant-sized mass. Let them not laugh. Let them understand how sorry I am for what my body has made, how my body was only doing what it was made to do, to make. How it pearled that tissue for years and years, a biblical undertaking, pale little knots of hope, little knots of shame. Let them scalpel it away, scrape it away, take it all from me. And let them take my womb too, that neglected pair pushed to one side, and let them clear away the tubes and corridors and muscled doors leading in and out that never welcomed what any man tried to put there. Let them invite grace into that stage now empty. Let them say grace over that pitiful mess, over the bucket brimming, over all I've laid to waste, over the nearly over now stench of iodine and cauterized flesh. And then, please, Lord, let them stitch the curtain of me tightly closed quickly now, before that grace escapes. I'm going to close with two poems. This is called Scare. And it might be the title of the book. Y'all can let me know what you think. Be like, that's not a good idea. Maybe? Scare? Scare. Let me tell you, no animal far away is the same up close. I mean, a whale in a magazine might seem majestic and free, but what you don't see is how too near the surface she falls asleep, how the light blisters her so raw, gulls tear into her sunburnt skin, lifting into the air beaks full of her proud flesh. Or you might believe the rhinoceros a beast with a sight so poor and mean he doesn't bother to make out a shape ahead before rushing from the bush, charging prehistoric horn first. But come with me, meet Joe, the lone black rhino at the zoo. His caretaker said, no worries, he won't bite down, and sure enough, I placed my hand in the daunting socket of his mouth, and inside it was sweetly pink and warm. He gently received the treat, dropped there, closed the soft pads of his eyes while he chewed. After, He puppied up to the fence for a scratch, and trembling, I reached to touch the living concrete of his back. Or take the house sparrow, harmless suburban chirper, common as a potato chip. I've seen them pluck each other bloody, snatching feathers to line their own nests, and it's no secret they'll mob their kin, dispatch their sisters' hatchlings with ease. You see, when I had cancer, or at least thought I did, one of those hot-wired birds fought his reflection in my window, and facing an adversary equal to his own, he broke his own neck. So don't let the word fool you. It's just a scare. It was only a scare. Queen of dismissal, the word is quick to exhale. Oh, thank God, to sigh. That was close. But listen, the word is a call. An amniotic skin peeled off a newborn so she can breathe, but also a membrane of omen and second sight. Scare is the threat of death gone, but the threat made real. Scare is your life returned, but worse, your life returned to how it was. You will bicker again and take it for granted again, and all those promises made to God and heaven above, if your pathology was clean, you will break. That's right. I've missed every chance 6 times already. I've seen how death might find me, each tumor core-needled and excised, cauterized and cut away, and between detection and diagnosis, I thought at least I'd get the last bit of my days right with so little left to go. Now, I'm again set free, but the forecast tickles the back of my throat, not what if, but when. What I mean to say is I've been brought to the edge of the woods, close enough to meet a herd of bison a friend kept. And when the bull ambled to our truck, I saw at first a sublime beast, a sovereign of the past. But once he was close enough to smell the stranger I was in his field, I saw a perfect row of flies drinking from the wet rim of his perfect eyes. How the winged ring of them persisted even when he blinked, as if he could still see the countless of his kind once murdered in this place. Listen, I'm not ungrateful. I survived another summer to see such a thing, and I don't pity myself more than I pity all of us who have to go. I only mean to say, when I felt for sure my marrow had soured and was killing me from the inside out, I dreamt every animal was a cage, and inside each animal was another animal, another cage. When I woke up, I meant to write down the dream, but instead wrote 2 words: I'm scared. Now I've healed. I've been blessed another clean bill of health, but the scare has grown teeth. Now I go back. I revise my original entry. I cross out scared and write terrified, then change it to terrorized. No, try again. I write, I am sorry. I am petrified, Lord. I am deeply afraid. Can you hear me? I am an animal who knows she will die. Can you not let me stay in my cage? I'm so glad y'all have techno contra music to dance to after this depressing ass reading of mine. I'm real sorry. I've got a bottle of bourbon. I'll make it up to you, I promise. I'm going to just read this one last poem. It does have a load of F-bombs in it, and I appreciate when I was here reading the poems from my grandmother and I said that she called me fucker. Y'all seem to appreciate that, so here we go again. This is called Anthem, and this is the last poem, I swear. Anthem. Cancer, let me. Cancer, let me sing you. Cancer, let me sing you a song. Lullaby up a coin's throw of syllables that spangle the well, a copper shimmer of wishes beneath water dark and cold. Let me sing Elise. Let me sing Eva, Eva and Elise, Elise and Eva, Eva, Elise, Elise, Eva, Elise. You hear those nectared vowels? Never before had I friends called by such honey-soaked syllables, but now, thanks to you, if I call those names, no one would answer, at least no one alive. What? You don't like the dirt taste of dirge? Well, how about I hum the tune of Jamie? Remember him? Or how about Alita, Thomas, Jason, Jerry, John, Miles? Any of those ring a bell? Or should I take you further back, sing the names erased when I was just a kid, new to you, like dear Miss Klein? Hers was the first skull I saw green up from its face. Or my grandmother. I was 12 and barely knew her first name, but you bloomed her ovaries blue so quick I hardly found time to say Wilma, much less say goodbye. Or let's recall that man who, after you had your way with his brain, lost his words. Hungry, he asked me for lunch, a ham salmon with pinchers on the side. He was a songwriter before you got to him, you thief, you marauder. And before you trashed what was left, his ankles were big around his thighs. They split and wept and could hardly prop him up that last time he stood on stage, humiliated in house shoes cut open to fit his football-sized feet. So cancer, I'm done. I'm through. Through gagging down funeral casseroles and sweating in black, trying to be such a good girl. I'm gut sick with you, always scratching at my door. Now it's over. Now it's just me and you. Come on, come here. I jump in the pit, mosh to that old punk riff. Those are people who died. Those are people who died. They were all my friends, and they died. Now you want to dance with me? Don't try to hide. I know you hear me. I'd like to take you outside, do some damage to your throat, like to strip your fine gray suit and shame you in a hospital gown that won't close in the back, like to snatch your head bald with 6 rounds of chemo and 20 more to go, like to bruise your arms with IV needles, shank your chest with a port. So there, it's out. Here we go. Are you listening? Can you hear me now? Cancer, fuck you. That's right. Fuck you and the horse you rode in on, your pre-dawn pesticides and puffed up plastic treats. Fuck the black lung sucked in from your seams of coal. And fuck that cowboy, a friend of yours, I'm sure, who thought it cute to gun his truck and leave me in a carbon cloud rough-necked from his tricked-out exhaust. Fuck your cigarettes, all those elegant and useless Hepburn filters my other grandmother used, all the time she double-tapped her manicured finger over a crystal ashtray, the nicotine sheen I cleared from chandeliers over our heads. You took her with tendrils greasy brown and bloated blue, and for that I will never forgive you. In that water made especially for you, draining off the malignant machinery of our towns. Fuck that too. All our smokestacks and processing plants and farms gone factory that cram pigs in so tight there is a lake of shit 3 city blocks long a man could fall into and drown. Fuck your tumors that grow unnoticed until, like wisteria up through a rain gutter, you cracked that man's spine, or as you did my great aunt, you stopped cold what was in her bowels, forced it back up through her mouth. Fuck the panic that rises up in me every time I touch the dense flesh of my own breasts, all biopsies marking all dark hours on that ludicrous clock I check obsessively with my hands, all scars marking mere frights, benign lumps, harmless, but there to keep me close to you. The first scare, the worst, a crescent moon botched around my right nipple, stitched when I was only 16. My body so new, but already yours. And fuck the fear in that pretty actress, who, after learning what her genes had in store, demanded her doctor remove both of hers. Fuck the teeth you've loosened, spit out like corn, and fuck what you did to my son-loving uncle, still going fishing every Wednesday, but with half a nose. Fuck you for sneaking paint under that artist's fingernails and taking his hand, and fuck you for that red knot of mucus in the baby's diaper, how her mother laughed at first, thinking it must be a silly, sick joke. Fuck your chemo brain, how my stylish friend drew on 2 lopsided brows, and fuck your pain patches and sutures and pills. Lost are we in your labyrinth of words, each of your ugly offspring in arrogant blasts given titles, Latinate, hard to pronounce, some even beautiful, named like a queen. Hail, hail, astrocytoma, ruler supreme of the spinal cord with her star-shaped cells. Blessed be neuroblastoma, that little known god who yanked my young cousin out of preschool and Zeused her into a weeping willow. A stand of ditch lilies, a browned mouse, step into the field, see if you can find her. Who could ever find that baby girl now? Who knows where she went? And fuck each of your kissing cousins too, one at the hospital who billed me $600 to flip my pillow and glance at my chart, another who apathetic answered the call station asking my social before my name, the one who said, your insurance plan states this is beyond the allowable amount. And fuck that intake nurse, too, who couldn't even spell benign when taking my history, saying, I'm sorry, we just don't hear that word around here so much. Fuck your 5-year clear milestones, because like a husband who beats his wife with an extension cords, she might escape but will glance in her rear view for life. And fuck those snaking tubes. One for the slow drip of that toxic fix that got its start as mustard gas in the foot-rot trenches of World War I. Another tube for intubation that, once removed, gores a throat so raw it cannot speak for hours. If this is an anthem, I place my hand across the beating left of my heart. I pledge allegiance to cells that grow and give up and move on when they should. I hawk you up and spit you out. I fire up a cauldron of spells, wicked witch myself a fortress of thorns, switch on a fence so electric it sparks in fog. And when that doesn't work, I'm not above begging. Please, somebody, fix this. Do anything. Do just anything. I simply want to grow old. I just want to be left with a body that can keep what it works hard to make, want to love what's intact, want every worn out organ and wiry gray accounted for and buried together all at once. I just want to die, as we all must die, but die without you, on our fucking own.
well, let's give one more round of applause to all of our